15 days before the Great Freeze, Riker and Alara led me into the woods, under the guise of a quick run, to check some supply caches. It was a familiar route, one I'd walked 100 times, hand in hand with Riker, laughing at the cold as it gnawed at our faces. But this time was different. The cold in the air wasn't the biting chill of winter. It was the cold of betrayal. I could still feel the glint of the knife in Riker's hand, the way he gripped it like an unspoken promise. Alara's eyes, sharp and knowing, never left me. We stopped by a small clearing where the trees bent like broken bones, the horizon dark with the early approach of snow. Riker had a strange look in his eyes, one I hadn't seen before, a mix of guilt and cold calculation. But then he'd always been good at hiding things. "Is this really necessary?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly, but I couldn't understand why. I'd never had reason to doubt them before. Never once. Riker smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, but we need to survive. We all do." Survival. The word echoed in my mind, but I never had time to process it fully before the first sharp pain hit my side. Riker had thrust the knife into me, too quickly for me to defend myself. The world spun, and then everything went cold. I woke to nothing but cold and the echoes of my final scream. But I wasn't dead. Not entirely. The remnants of my memory, a thin thread in the chaos, kept me tethered. The frozen air whispered across my skin as I took my first shallow breaths, knowing somehow that my second chance was running out. I crawled into the small shelter I'd built over the last few years. The walls formed from scrap metal, reinforced concrete, and insulation I had scavenged from abandoned buildings. The shelter had been made for survival, not comfort. Its cold efficiency mirrored the coldness I felt in my heart. It was there, in the solitude, that I first experimented with my power. At first, I thought it was a fluke, just the leftover adrenaline and desperation from my near-death experience. But I could feel the cold, like a familiar companion, a tangible force I could bend to my will. It wasn't just about keeping food from spoiling or creating shelter. I could store objects, time, even moments in a cold, compressed space that was somehow separate from the world I knew. Each experiment with the pocket dimension was thrilling but unsettling. It felt as though I was playing with a force I didn't fully understand. There were times when objects would disappear without explanation, leaving behind only a strange, frosty residue. Other times, the items I'd frozen would come back to me warmer than when I'd stored them. It wasn't always predictable, and the more I used it, the more I felt something shift inside me, a pull toward something larger than survival alone. By the time the Great Freeze descended upon the world, I was ready. I emerged from my shelter, stepping into the world now blanketed in snow and ice. The air tasted of sharpness, and the sky was an unbroken sheet of gray. The horizon was swallowed by an eternal winter. But it was in this desolate landscape that I began to hunt. Riker and Alara had taken control of a shopping mall in the center of what used to be a thriving city. The building was a fortress now, its doors welded shut to keep out the cold. But it was also a prison. The survivors they ruled over lived in fear, scavenging for scraps, while their captors hoarded the essentials. The moment I laid eyes on the mall from the ridge overlooking the valley, I felt my stomach tighten. The memories of what they'd done, what they'd taken from me, roared to life. I knew I wasn't just going to take this mall back. I was going to reshape it into something new, something that would last. I spent weeks gathering intel, hiding in the surrounding forests, watching as Riker's patrols moved like clockwork. They were ruthless, but I had knowledge they didn't. I knew every back door, every vent, every crawl space in that mall. I'd been there when it was still a bustling shopping center, shopping for things I thought were important, things like perfume, electronics, and fancy shoes. Now, I'd used that knowledge to tear down the walls they'd built. I hacked into their communication system, small but vital steps. I intercepted their messages and fed misinformation through the old PA system. It was small sabotage at first, broken security cameras, a missing supply cart, strange noises at night. Then, as the cracks appeared, I began to make my move. The day I finally infiltrated the mall felt like the calm before the storm. The ventilation shafts were narrow but familiar, winding their way through the mall's heart. I moved slowly, methodically, feeling the weight of the plan on my shoulders. The pocket dimension throbbed inside me, almost as if it were alive. I could feel the frost creeping into my bones, a reminder that this power came with a cost. I reached the central atrium undetected. Riker and Alara were on a raised platform, surrounded by their followers. The people here were hungry, desperate, and they were loyal to Riker and Alara, not because they loved them, but because they feared them. The moment I stepped out of the shadows, the crowd fell silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. Riker blinked, unsure, then recognition flickered behind his eyes. He staggered back, his breath catching in his throat.
No.
No, this can't be real. I stepped forward, my voice a cold whisper that cut through the tense silence. It's real, Riker. I'm back. Alara's eyes narrowed. She always had a quick temper, and seeing me again rattled her. You're just a ghost, a vengeful spirit, she hissed, her voice laced with venom. I didn't answer her at first. Instead, I took a step closer, letting the chill of my presence sink into the crowd. I remember everything, I said. The betrayal, the knife, the lies, the death. My eyes found Riker's. And I remember what you did to my family. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I pulled out a small frozen shard from my pocket, something I'd taken from Riker's jacket the day they killed me. As the crowd gasped, I froze it, and Riker's smug expression shattered into pure fear. You have a choice, I said. You can die in your ice tomb, or you can work to rebuild what you destroyed. Alara's voice was a snarl. You think you can control us? We built this place, You didn't build this place. I cut her off. You enslaved it. With a simple motion of my hand, I opened the pocket dimension, and in a flash of ice, I froze Riker and Alara into solid blocks of ice. The cold was so deep that their expressions were locked in silent screams. The crowd gasped, the air thick with shock. Then, slowly, the clapping began. First one person, then another, until the applause was deafening. I didn't know whether I felt triumphant or sickened. Perhaps both. As I took control of them all, the survivors pledged their loyalty to me. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with them. I'd never been a leader before. But the weight of my family's loss, and the knowledge that I couldn't let the cycle of betrayal continue, pushed me into action. I began to restructure everything, starting with food distribution, and ending with justice for those who had been oppressed. I set up a council to help govern, drawing from the survivors who had once feared Alara and Riker. And slowly, the mall became more than just a shelter. It became a symbol of hope. But there were challenges. Not everyone wanted to submit to my authority. There were whispers of rebellion, of those who wanted a harsher regime, someone who would rule with an iron fist. I knew I would have to be both fair and unforgiving. The power of the cold pocket remained my greatest tool. But each time I used it, I felt the strain on my body, as if the cold were becoming a part of me, eating away at something deep within. Months had passed since I'd taken control of them all. The survivors were beginning to trust me, seeing the changes I'd made: a new ration system, a fairer distribution of resources, and a protection force that kept the worst of the looters at bay. The ice blocks containing Riker and Alara stood at the center of the mall like grim trophies, reminders of what I'd done and the power I'd claimed. The people respected me, but there was a small part of me that still feared what I was becoming, feared the weight of the crown I had not asked for. Then one night, as I sat in my command room, overlooking the courtyard where survivors trained, I heard something that made my heart stop. A knock on the door. It was the last thing I expected. When I opened it, I found him standing there.
Moksh.
I hadn't seen him since that day, the day I was killed, the day he lost his sister. Max had grown into a young man during my absence. His face was lean, his hair shorter than I remembered, and there was a hardness to him that hadn't been there before. His eyes, once full of wonder, now held a cold edge, a reflection of the world he'd lived through without me. He stared at me for a long moment, as though trying to confirm that I was real. His lips parted, but no words came. It was as if the years had stolen away his voice. Max, I finally said, my throat tight. I thought you were
Dead.
He finished for me, his voice flat. Yeah, I thought so too. I took a step toward him, but he flinched, as if he were afraid of being hurt. I didn't want to leave you, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't. Max shook his head, taking a step back. You weren't there, Lena. You weren't there when everything fell apart. When they told us you were dead, when Mom and Dad... Grandma, he paused, swallowing hard. You were supposed to protect us. And now you come back leading this? His words were like daggers, sharp and precise, each one cutting deeper than the last. He didn't see me as a leader. He saw me as the sister who abandoned him, the one who left him to bear the pain of loss alone. I opened my mouth to explain, but I couldn't find the words. How could I explain the hell I'd crawled out of? How could I explain that I hadn't chosen to die, that I hadn't chosen to come back as a weapon of ice? Instead, I just stood there, feeling the weight of everything I had become. The weight of the cold. Max's eyes flicked to the frozen blocks of Riker and Alera in the main atrium, their figures still encased in ice. He shuddered. Is that what you're doing now? Freezing your enemies? His voice cracked. You're just like them. You're becoming a monster. No, I whispered, my heart heavy. I'm trying to protect you. All of you. This place, this is our chance. Max's expression was unreadable as he turned and walked toward the door. Maybe it is. But you're not the person I thought you'd be. And I don't know how to fix that. The cold was creeping deeper into me, day by day. I could feel it, like an insidious poison, a weight inside my chest that no one else could see. At first, it was just the frostbite on my fingertips, the way my hands would tremble after I used the cold pocket. Then came the exhaustion, bone deep and relentless. It wasn't just the physical toll of fighting for survival, but something more. The cold was starting to claim pieces of me. I could feel it in my dreams. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night, clutching my chest, gasping for warmth, only to realize that the warmth I craved was slipping away from me. My body, my soul, they were starting to freeze over, bit by bit, like Riker and Alera. There were moments when I felt like I was slipping into their frozen state, the same numbness I had given them. One night, as I was alone in the command center, a thought crossed my mind, a terrifying, almost laughable thought. What if I could never stop? What if I couldn't control the cold anymore? What if it took me as it had taken them, frozen in time, lost to the world? The pocket dimension, the power I had so carefully learned to wield, had a price. Each time I used it, the cold took a little more of my humanity, a little more of the warmth that used to live inside me. I stood up from the desk, my body aching, and walked to the small mirror in the corner of the room. My reflection seemed distant, like it belonged to someone else, someone who had died long ago. There were faint cracks in the skin of my hands, tiny marks of frostbite that wouldn't heal. The cold wasn't just taking my body. It was taking my spirit. As the days passed, I began to notice something strange. Small rebellions were beginning to stir among the survivors. It started with subtle acts of defiance, missing supplies, broken windows, whispers in the dark corners of the mall. It seemed as though not everyone was content under my rule. At first, I thought it was just the growing pains of a new leadership, but soon it became clear that there were those who didn't like the way I had been running things. They didn't like the fairness, the changes, or perhaps my growing use of the cold power that was both my strength and my curse. One evening, as I walked through the mall, I overheard a conversation in a dimly lit hallway. A group of survivors were huddled together, speaking in low voices, but their words carried to me like a knife to the heart. "We can't let her control us forever," one of them said, his voice rough. "The cold she carries, it's starting to take her. She's losing herself." "Maybe that's what we need," another responded. "She'll freeze us all in time. We'll be nothing but statues, her little army of ice." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were right. The cold was already claiming me, and now they saw it too. I retreated back to my quarters, my mind racing. Was I becoming the monster they feared? Was this power, this cold, truly worth the price I was paying? Or was I just another version of Riker and Alara, someone who would use any means to control others, no matter the cost? Few days later, Max came to me again. He didn't knock this time, just barged into my room, eyes blazing with fury. "I've been talking to people," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I don't like what I'm hearing. You're becoming something we can't follow." I looked at him, my chest tightening. "Max, this isn't what you think. I'm trying to protect this place. Protect you. You're not protecting us, Lena. You're using us. You're becoming exactly like them, like Riker, like Alara. You freeze people in their tracks, you manipulate everyone. You've turned into a tyrant." His words cut deep. I had tried so hard to make something good of this, to lead with justice. But Max had always been able to see the truth I'd been avoiding. "I'm doing this because it's the only way to survive," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You don't understand. The cold, it's taking me. But I have to keep using it. I have to keep fighting." Max stepped closer, his eyes softening for a moment. "You don't have to fight alone. You don't have to freeze everything, Lena. You don't have to freeze yourself." But I couldn't hear him. The power inside me, the cold, was too loud. It was the only thing that kept me alive. It was the only thing I had left. "I have to," I said, my voice hard. "I'm doing this for you, Max. For everyone." He stared at me for a long moment, the anger in his eyes slowly turning to sorrow. "Then you're already lost." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, alone once more.